Good to be back in the house of the Lord this morning. Beautiful day the Lord has made, and we're going to rejoice in it. Rejoice in Him. And the day, boy, I tell you, it's beautiful out there today. It's almost like what we'll expect for the next month or so. And fall time. You know, fall will be here in 3 weeks. My goodness. I tell you what, the older we get, the quicker it goes, don't it? But I tell you, that means we're just getting closer to eternity, don't it? That's the way I look. I wouldn't want to go back. Would y'all want to go back? No. I want to go forward. Keep pressing on forward. Huh?
Can't do anything back there what's already happened.
That's right. That's right. I wouldn't want to go back. You know, people, a lot of people, they want to find a fountain of youth, don't they? Want to think they're going to live forever? That's not true. The only way they're going to live forever is they accept Christ as their Savior. It's the only way they're going to live. Well, they're going to live forever, one way or the other, though. You know, they might live in destruction in eternity. As long as heaven is, hell's going to be the same. And people don't realize that. We're in Esther, chapter 2. And I'm going to start around verse 7. If you remember last week as we started Esther and Vashti, the queen refuses to come before the king, and he banned her out of his presence. In the meantime, in between chapters 1 and 2, he goes on a big war with Greece, and he loses his whole shipyard, and he loses a lot of, they said he might have lost close to 2 million soldiers. You think of that. He had a lot more soldiers than the Greeks did, but the Greeks knew how to fight, and these Persians and Medes, they didn't know how to fight like the Greeks did. So, but anyway, they lost a lot of people. So here he comes back, and in chapter 2, where we got Esther and we got Mordecai. These are the 2 people we're going to hear about a lot, and then we're going to hear about old Haman too. Haman's the villain in the whole book of Esther, and actually Esther is I guess you'd call her the hero, and Mordecai, he's part of it. But you know, one thing about him, as I mentioned last week, if you wasn't here, God is not mentioned in the book. God is not mentioned in Esther. Jehovah, not at all. But he's implied, and we'll see that. We're going to see that in the scenes you can see him fasting. Who are they going to fast to? They're going to fast to God. Even though his name's not mentioned, they're going to mention fasting, and also Mordecai. He had, and we'll maybe get to that. I don't know if we're going to get that far or not, but he had insight to knowing the Scripture, and you could see that in Mordecai. But here, you know, you thought of what happens here. Esther is which in verse 7, let me read that first. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther. Now, Hadassah is her Hebrew name, means myrtle. Her Persian name is Esther, which means star. And it's part of one of their gods, which is Star, and derived from that. So they gave Esther a Persian name, sort of, I guess, that was like all of them done that. Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they had Hebrew names, but they changed them and gave them Babylonian names. Daniel, he had a different name. They gave him Belshazzar or something like that. You know, they gave him 2 names. You had a name that they in their captivity land, but yet you always had your Hebrew, your Jewish name also. They had 2 names. And you know, I thought of that in Revelations. You know, God's going to give us what? He's going to give us a new name. You remember that? You know, we have a name down here, but when we get to heaven, we're going to have a new name. He's going to have us a new name. I don't know if I'm going to be named Jeff or not. You might know me by Jeff. I don't know. We're known as we're known, or you're going to know that you know me, but don't know who, you know. There are a lot of unknowns, but we want to go see, don't we? We want to be there. We want to be there to know what God has in store. But here, Esther, and it was his uncle's daughter. So how was Esther and Mordecai kin? They were cousins. They were cousins. And said, for she had neither father nor mother. So she was what? An orphan. So Esther was an orphan. Okay, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. You know, Mordecai adopted Esther, took her as his own daughter, raised her up. And, we're going to see in the scriptures that, Esther obeyed him just as his father. I mean, just anything, they loved one another. Mordecai, when Mordecai, and I thought this, in scripture, it says not to be unequally yoked, right? This was a mistake of Mordecai. In scripture, this is the first beauty pageant, I guess you'd say, the first and only beauty pageant that's recorded in scripture, and is in Esther. And, Mordecai, knowing that Esther was Jewish, should not even have put her in this beauty pageant to be queen of a pagan land. See what I'm saying? That shouldn't even happen. But, if it didn't happen, the Jews might have been annihilated. What happens here. God's providence, even though it's not God's will, and we go and do something out of his will, God can turn it. And God knew before, he knew that they was going to fail. He knew they was going to go in Babylonian captivity. He knew the Persians and the Medes was going to take over Babylon. He knew Mordecai and Esther was going to be here at this time. That's why it's written here. And God knew that. But God can turn, if we're out of his will, he could turn it what? And he could turn it around. He could turn it around to his good. He could do that. And he does do that here. But it said, so he came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together into Shushan the palace, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her. Now listen what this Haggai did. Esther found favor in this feller so much that he gave her, he put her to the front. He even gave 7 maidens to watch, to tend to her. And not only that, which were meet to given her out of the king's house, and he preferred her and her maids into the best place of the house of the women. What did he do? He put her in the best place of that house. He put her up front. There's something about Esther. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred. Now here's the thing. Nobody knew that she was a Jew. They all thought she was Persian. So this Haggai, if he knew that Esther was a Jew, guess what? She wouldn't have got the best. She probably wouldn't even have been there. But one thing, there ain't no way that he'd have gave her priority and put her in the best place of the house. See what I'm saying?
Was she a Jew because of her adopted parents? You reckon? Or maybe she didn't look like a typical Jew is why they thought she was. You know what I mean? Because she was adopted.
Why they thought she was, because she was born in Shushan. She was born here by her parents, but her parents had ceased. Okay? Mordecai, we'll see that he's a Jew, and he even says he's a Jew. But then they put 2 to 2 together because Mordecai and Esther, and finally Esther says that she's Jewish. But, why she kept it secret? Because really if they ask, well, who was your mom and dad? They're dead. She didn't have to tell them. It wasn't like she would lie. It's just she didn't have to tell them. You know what I'm saying? So she sort of kept it hidden that way. But she was definitely of Jewish origin. I mean, definitely. But she was born in Persia. She was born in Persia. But she still was a Jewish woman. But here Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. So what her cousin say? She said, now you don't tell them that you're a Jew. You keep it hidden. And that's what she did. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Now, when you're out of the will of the Lord, what does it show Mordecai doing? You can't have peace, can you? What's he doing? What do? just said, don't, you know, you're all tore up without the Lord, without the peace, without knowing that you're in God's will. And he knew, and you know, and here he's putting her in a beauty contest to be queen, and what? Well, he has no rest. He's just pacing, see what's going to happen to Esther. Said, now, when every maid's turn was come to go in to King Ahasuerus, after she had been 12 months, according to the manner of women. I'm going to ask y'all women, wouldn't you like to take a 1 year, as a whole year, of beautification? I'm just kidding. No, I mean really, that's exactly what this is. They beautified these women a whole year. Now I couldn't fathom that when I read that. According to the manner of women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors. So for 6 months they soaked them in oil. I said, what in the world are they doing, these women? And for 6 months they put them in smelly stuff. That's all I can say. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? I mean, you know, God has a sense of humor, don't he? I mean, this is his word, and he made sure this got in there. And when I read that verse, I said, for a whole year, 6 months of this and 6 months of that, trying to beautify these women. And the first beauty contest, but you know what this beauty contest was? It's from pagan. Now think of this. This is pagan Gentile that it was written in our scripture. There's nothing, I think there's nothing godly about it myself. Now that's parading women around. I mean, it's ungodly. It's ungodly. This is an ungodly situation here. But just think, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden to the king, whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she was called by name. Now, this is how this worked over there in the Eastern time. These maidens, they were all purified, whatever. They went in before the king. Okay, king, whatever. Look, whatever he. Okay, for one, when they come back out, they went to a different house. Okay, the queen, when she's picked, she was the queen, the only one out of all these women. But you know what all them other women become? Concubines. So you think what Mordecai put his cousin in here. If she didn't become a queen, guess what she had to be? A concubine. And never, like if a king didn't call for them, they were they're almost like prisoners. I mean, that's about almost what you'd say. They had to stay in these kings, these palaces, these houses, and that's it for the rest of their life. For the rest of their life. You think of that. I mean, if you remember when David had his concubines, and when, who was it, Absalom, or his son, that, remember, he went into his father's concubine, and then when Solomon went to rule, he took David's concubine. See, they stayed. They stayed. It was a lifetime thing, a lifetime change here for these women. But here it said, concubine, she came into the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. So they could not go into the king any time except the king had to call them by name. Now when the turn of Esther, now here comes Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, now we find out exactly who they are, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go into the king. She required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. Now, you know what? She didn't have to be adorned. You know, some of these girls, they probably put chains, veil, you know, over there they done all kinds of different, paint their face. You know, Egyptians was big with putting blue and purple. And you know what, Esther? She didn't require nothing. she was that beautiful that she didn't require just what that man said or put on her, very little, but just her natural beauty to stand out. Because this man, this Haggai, he knew what the king, like Vashti. I thought of Vashti. Maybe, Esther, maybe he made her sort of to favor Vashti because he loved Vashti. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know. But one thing is, he didn't have to put all that stuff on Esther because she had natural beauty. But here it says, so Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So 7th year of his reign, Esther comes in. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So, as soon as he seen Esther, it's almost like Boaz and Ruth. Remember that was, Boaz, as soon as he seen it, was almost like you'd call it love at first sight. That's what happened here. He seen Esther, and boy, that's it. She's my queen. He put the crown upon her head. So now she's the queen. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. Now this made release meant a proclamation of a holiday. Maybe even you didn't have to pay taxes or whatever. Boy, I tell you, they need to come up with something like that today, don't they? They have some kind of release where you don't have to pay tax. But they gave gifts according to the state of the king. And in verse 19 it says, and when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Now, they don't really know why all these were gathered the second time. Esther's already the queen. I don't know. They just no explanation why this all gathered the second time. But Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, so she's kept it secret, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai like as when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, now I'm just going to point this out. Mordecai was a Jew. He sat at the king's gate. You know what that meant? That meant he was either a porter, a doorkeeper. He was a part of the judge. You know where all the business transpired? At the gate of the city. That is where all the business transpired. Like I mentioned a while ago, Boaz and Ruth, the story. Remember when he went to ask the other feller, where did they meet at? At the gate. At the gate, where they gave him the shoe and all that. I don't know if y'all remember all that. But all that was at this gate. It was at the king's gate. So now we know that Mordecai, he sat at the king's gate. He had some kind of position in the Persian rule here. I mean, he was something to do with. And I was thinking, did Esther get him that job? Say, hey, I got a cousin that might be fit in. Once she become queen. I don't know. I don't know if Mordecai was already at the king's gate in this position before Esther was picked or vice versa. Don't know if it's afterward. But here Mordecai was at this gate, and two of the king's chamberlains. Now these chamberlains were these eunuchs. And it says, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth. What's that mean? They were angry. And sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. You know what they sought to do? To kill him. And I was thinking about these two eunuchs. I bet they were friends to Vashti. And they were probably upset how the king done her. And it just ate at them. Just think, it's been 4 years? It's just ate, bitterness will just eat you. And it ate them into a state that they're going to take the king's life. They're going to assassinate the king over this. But Mordecai, when they heard maybe the king's name, his ear got a little bit closer, and he heard their plot. He heard what they were saying. And you know what? that's God's province. You know, I thought of this. A lot of times I don't hear things because God don't want me to hear things. Sometimes God will let us hear things when he wants us to hear. But, you know, people, I mean, that's on a lot of different things if you think about it. Because my wife can ask, did you hear that? I said, no. Didn't need to hear it. You hear that a lot. You know, maybe I wasn't listening for that, you know. But, you know, I thought of this. God opened Mordecai's ears at this time to hear this plot, and this is going to help the whole story when we get a few chapters later. But here he hears it, and the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. So he tells Esther tells the king, say, hey, Mordecai, the doorkeeper, whatever at your gate, heard them plotting your assassination. Now look what happens. And when Inquisition, what's Inquisition? The FBI was sent out. No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's true. The panel was sent out to see if it was true. You know, you're innocent until proven guilty. Well, he had to set this up. Doing the Inquisition was made of the matter. It was found out. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree. You know, that's how they, capital punishment in Persia, they crucified them. That was part of their thing. They crucified. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Now, I'm going to halt right there. Mordecai told Esther. Esther told the king. King found out. King's life was saved. Guess what we don't find here? We don't find not a thing that the king done for Mordecai, do we? It's not written. It ain't written that the king said, oh, where's this Mordecai? I want to thank him. I want to give him this or put him in a different position or whatever. You don't hear that, do you? You know, when I read this story, I said, well, boy, it sounds familiar. Sort of sounds like Joseph, don't it? I mean, the story of Joseph, how he was put in and different things, it almost sort of, you know, sounds a little bit like that. But said in chapter 3 now, says, now here comes old Haman. Now I thought of Haman, my goodness. And you know, when I thought of this Purim and what I told y'all last week, every time they have this feast, when they say Haman, they got noisemakers and people yelling, and I can almost see them doing it. And they drowned out his name. They don't want to hear, when Haman is mentioned, in Purim, they read this whole book straight through. They read the story of Esther because that's how it started. And you know, they still do it today. It's one of their feasts. But I thought of this. So after these things, did King Ahasuerus promote Haman? So when they said Haman, they'd start yelling. They'd start doing these noisemakers and drown his name out. Now listen who Haman was. The son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. And advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. Now this word, Agagite, was a Amalekite. If you look up 1 Samuel chapter 15, I think it's in 15, you find this is the very king that Saul, when God told him to go kill all of them, don't bring back none of the spoil, loot, nothing. And here he brings this king back. You know what his name was? Agag. Agag. So this man possibly could have been descendant of this king. Because they supposed to annihilate them all, and they didn't. You know, when God said to annihilate them all, they didn't do it. And you know what? It come later down the road. Now, if that is true, after we read, we see what happens here. That put Haman, when Mordecai, when he found out he was a Jew, because see, they were enemies, big enemies, because of this. And it started all the way back in there. And you know, I thought of this. You know, today, them enemies are still there. I mean, 2020, that started here are still over there. And they hate the Jews. You hear anti-Semitism, you know, for the Jews, the people hate Jews. We love the Jews. We should love them. Why? They're God's chosen people. If we have any hate for the Jewish people, God help us. You know, I mean, we shouldn't. Because they are our brothers, you know, and sisters. But, you know, I thought of this. What hate that this Haman had, and we're going to get to that. Said, but the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. So you know what he made him? He made him vice president. Really, I mean, he was a second down from the king. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed. Now listen to this. Bowed and reverenced Haman. Now this word reverenced means that when they bowed as he was what? A god. I thought of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They wouldn't bow to that idol, would they? Well, you know what? This is a man. Now, God is not implied here, but we see here that Mordecai, he knows the law, don't he? Said, you know, he says, have no other God before me. He would not do this because why? Because he was a Jew, and we'll see that. And for the king had so commanded concerning him. See, the king even gave order. When this man goes to y'all, you're going to have to bow to him. He's the second in command. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. So he would not bow. I like old Mordecai. You know what? The world wants us to bow, don't they? We shouldn't bow. No compromise. Stay strong. They want us to bow out, bow down, whatever they want us to do, we ain't going to do it. Why? We should not do it. But I thought of this. He won't do it. Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said to Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now I thought all these other people, they didn't have no trouble. Boy, here comes old Haman, and boy, here they go, right? And it ain't just like this. I mean, they went down on all fours. That's how they bowed. I mean, they hit the ground and bowed before him. And, you know, they're saying, Mordecai, why don't you got to do this. You have to do this. They knew he was going to get in trouble is what they thought. Now, it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, see, daily they kept saying, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. Now, this word matters means that his words would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. See? That's why Mordecai, they kept trying to make him do it. And finally, Mordecai had to reveal that he was a Jew. Now, if they put two to two together and they know that Esther, but they didn't. Now you think of this. Because Esther was a cousin. Then they should have known she was a Jew, right? But see, that's what I'm saying. They just did not do it right yet. But anyway, here they find out that Mordecai's a Jew, and that's why he's not bound. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to what? Destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. You think of how evil this man was. I mean, he had wrath against just one man. Mordecai wouldn't buy. Why didn't he just take him out? Right? What's he do? He says, I'm going to kill every Jew. Now, who else said that? Hitler? Several of them in our history, you know, has done. Russia, you could just name different ones that hates Jews and would like to what? Annihilate them for no reason. For no reason. I mean, here Mordecai, one man, and you know what he's going to try to do? He's going to try to take all the Jews out. Every one of them. He's going to kill them all. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur. Now, S-P-U-R, this is how they get the feast Purim. This is how it was named off of this. Pur, that is the lot. It's a lot. They cast lots. I don't know if they rolled stones. They put all 12 months in and rolled them out and numbers for the day. I have no idea how they done it, but they called it pure in Persia, and it meant casting lots. Before Haman, from day to day, and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. And I like that. You know, even though they're using this, this lot, guess who had control of it? God did. Why? Because you know what it come to? They had 11 months. Instead of picking 1 month and didn't have no time to do anything, God made them to have almost a year to be able to plan, to save his people. You know what I'm saying? So God, instead of this lot coming out the first month or the second month, God said, well, I'm going to give them the maximum amount of time to come up with, something. And I thought that was, that had to be God. It had to be God that done that. And you can see him working in the pages. And Haman said unto the king of Ahasuerus, this is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse. What that means, diverse, that means different from all the people, other people. From all the people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore, it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. What's that mean? To let them live, to let them remain. See what Haman, he comes in and puts that kind of picture of the Jewish people before this king. Now, if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business. You think 10,000, you know how much that was in our money? $20 million is how much silver that Haman was going to pay to get him killed. I just couldn't see. To bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring. Now, I thought, boy, Haman is mean. But when I thought of this king, I said, well, I think he's even meaner. He didn't care about human life, about innocent people. He didn't care of nothing. What did he do? And the king took his ring from his hand, gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and the Jews' enemy. He gave him his ring. You know what that ring represented? Power, authority. It represented what it did. It had a signet on it. They melted wax. Right? If you write a letter or a law and you put a little bit of wax there and you take that ring, that king's ring, and stamp it in that wax, it couldn't be broken, couldn't be changed, and had to be done. And you know who he gave it to? He gave it to Haman. Haman could have done anything. I thought, man, that's crazy. And the king said to Haman, the silver is given to thee. That king said, all this silver, you take it. I don't want it. You take it. The people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. My. You know, we have people like that today, evil, ain't they? We see that even on our news. You turn it on, you see people saying, how can somebody do another person like that? It's evil. And you can see it here. I mean, these two men are evil. They're pagans, they're evil. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded the king's lieutenants, to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring. They wrote this down, that on this day, we'll say, and the letter, on this day, you rise up and you kill all the Jews. And it was sent, remember, he had 127 provinces, different languages. You know, this wasn't a small task. To get all them letters out to all them, it had to take some time, you know. But how they had they didn't have, like, you just pick up a phone or these little flat phones now. They didn't have that. What they had to do, they had to send it almost like in the West, But what they rode camels. They didn't have them fast horses running. You know what I'm saying? But it went to one and then another, and I could see them going through all these towns and tacking up the letter that all Jews had to be killed at a certain day. My. I mean, that had to be. And you know what? Judah, Jerusalem, guess what? That was part of this 127 provinces. So it had to be, that letter had to be tacked up on Jerusalem's walls. So all the Jews would be killed all over. I mean, it wasn't just here in the town. And you know, it only started with Mordecai. You think of that. I mean, it's only Mordecai that wouldn't bow. And now all the Jews in all the provinces were going to be killed over it. And the letters were sent by post. These posts were like I said, the carriers, into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. So see, that day they rose up and was going to kill all women, children, kill them all. Who's that sound? That sounded like Hitler, didn't he? He killed many millions of Jews. I don't know if he killed women and children. I guess he did. But, you know, there are a lot that he saved, because I see shows on TV where the women the little children had grown up and was telling about some of it. But, you know, I thought of this. You know what the plan was? To annihilate. I mean, he was so evil and was so bitter against the Jewish people that he said, you're going to destroy them all. And you know, I thought without Esther, without Mordecai, without what happens, you know, that plan probably could have happened. But you know, God was not going to let that happen. He wouldn't let it happen, would he? And that's what Esther, you know, even though his name's not mentioned, you can see him working in the pages, can't you? You can see God's working in the pages. Said, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. The decree, that law was given in Shushan palace. And the king, now look what happens to the king and Haman. Sat down to drink. Now you think, after they done all this and made this law, was going to kill every Jew, what did they do? They sat down and start drinking, get drunk. Just, well, you know. I mean, don't have no regard of what they done or anything. It's just amazing to me. But the city, Shushan, listen, was this. This is the capital city, was perplexed. What does that mean? That means they were confused. They read this and said, why? You know, they had neighbors, probably loved them. Them Jews probably, you know what I'm saying? Probably treated them good, moral people, and probably helped them out and stuff. Now they got a degree, and they're perplexed. They're confused. Even the Persians didn't want to do this. You know, I mean, it stunned them, didn't it? And you know what King and Haman doing? Sitting there drinking. Didn't care nothing, not a thing. Didn't, for all the life it was going to be lost. Didn't care for nothing. And then in chapter 4, we'll just start this. I know we're running out of time. But when Mordecai perceived all that was done, what did Mordecai do? He rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. You know, even though God's not mentioned, who'd he do that to? He done that to God, didn't he? That's mentioned when deep mourning and you're fasting, and actually prayer is not mentioned, but you're praying. What do? You put sackcloth in those, you rent your clothes. So you can see that Mordecai is pleading with God. Said, and came even before the king's gate. He even come to the king's gate like that. And that was a no-no. Listen to it. For none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. You know, the king, all he wanted to see was stuff that was good. You know, nothing bad. He wanted to see stuff good. So you couldn't come to the gate mourning, crying, you know, in sackcloth. He didn't want to see that. So he banned it. And you know, I thought of these laws that Persians and Medes made. You can't go back. You had to make another law, you know, to combat that law, but you could never go back and take that law away. That was unreal. Said, and in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai, and to take away his sackcloth from him. But what did he do? He received it not. You know what he's doing? He's trying to get Esther's attention here. She sent him clothes because she knew he's in trouble. I mean, if a king found this out, his life could be taken. So she sent him clothes to be clothed, but he wouldn't receive them. Then called to Esther for Hadach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend unto her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Esther, when he said, he didn't take my clothes, then what he said, I want to find out why. So she, you know what, I thought of this. Everybody else, Mordecai knew. It was posted on the gate, but yet the queen didn't even know the plot. So inside the palace, they keep everything good, nothing bad. You know what I'm saying? That's the way they kept it. They kept it quiet. Queen didn't even know what was going on here. So, all right, I'll stop there. Seems like we're getting, every time we stop around 6 or 7 verse of the chapter. Here we go. Okay. All right, Lord willing, chapter 4, around 6 or 7, we'll pick up next week. But you know, I just, Esther, I like this book. I really do. I mean, it's just something. It's different. It's different. But you know, I thought of Ruth, of the 2 books in the Bible that has women's names, Ruth and Esther. Well, I thought of Ruth. Ruth is a story of redemption, of God's redemption, redeeming, you know. And Esther is a story, even though God's not mentioned, prayer's not mentioned, but now fasting is, and we know who that's fasting too. It's implied, but what Esther's a story of is God's providence. I like that. His guiding, his changing things and leading. What he rules and overrules the affairs of man. And he does that today. You know, we think of, we got a big election coming up here in November. God is on the throne. God is on the throne. And you know, we say, well, you hear all kinds of stuff, right? This one's going to do this one played with this. Does your vote count? You could think of all kinds of stuff. Here's what I think. Vote for Jesus and realize that God is on the throne. And you know what? He can rule and overrule the affairs of what the evil people, and we need to pray for them. God, help them. Save them. If you can't save them, take them out. Right? I mean, I hate to say that, but God can do that. God can do that. And you know what? That's what we're seeing here in the book of Esther. I mean, Haman was going to take all the Jews and kill them, but you know who loses their life at the end of the book? Haman does. Huh? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So God rules and overrules the affairs of man, and we got to realize that. And we really have to keep that in our mind and in our heart, that he is on the throne and he's going to do
He's got his plan, but it's going to come about.
what pleases him. Yes,
We might
yes.
see darkness, but we might think, well, yeah, that's not going to work.
Right.
But that's where we got to say, yeah, it will, because God knows. Because we think, okay, it should be this way.
Right.
You know, and it's going to go this way. But
Yeah.
God knows how to bring about his plan.
Right. Right. That's right.
We've gotta trust that.
That's what we have, and you know what? We have trouble with that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We all do. We all do. We could all say that. It's easy to say words, but is it easy to believe them? You know what I'm saying? To really put them to work and trust? It's hard for us, ain't it? Because why? We're in this. But soon, guess what? I got you good news. Soon we're going to have a glorified body. We're going to empty this robe of flesh, and we're going to have, you got an empty stick. Okay, thank you. We're going to, guess what? We're going to have a new body. This old flesh will not be our trouble anymore. Satan will be put in his place. I can't even comprehend going through a whole day without something trash go through my mind and say, where did that come from? You know what I'm saying? I know where it comes from. Say, Lord, help me. But you know what I'm saying? I can't even fathom when we get to heaven and there's none of that. My, you think what peace and, oh, it's just something. It's just something to think about. I want to go. Don't you want to go?
Brother, Satan's putting out a lot of propaganda.
Yes, he is.
And we got to decipher through that book.
Right.
For help.
That's right. Right.
That's the holy word of God.
Yes.
We hold on. That's what Mordecai believed was looking to the word of God. God was going to make change things around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just like he did with Joseph, but he's going to kill him because
Yep.
of jealousy.
Right.
But Reuben run interference and put him in the home. Here comes some. God sent somebody along to find him.
Yes.
Take him, took him on down, and
Right.
he was making preparation for them to take care of him.
That's it.
Just like you and I.
That's
Jesus
right.
came, he's done made it,
Mm-hmm.
we're settled, and we're gone.
That's
So
right.
hold on.
Amen. Amen. That's true. Very true.